You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Michelle Jewel Shaw, award-winning volunteer and chairperson of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
Today is May 21st, 2023, and this is episode 226 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we're going to listen to part 2 of a 3-part interview with Barry Porter, who is the author of the excellent new book, Adventures of a Lightkeeper. First, I want to remind people about a couple of lighthouse celebrations that will be happening this year.
Right, Jeremy. This is the 150th anniversary of Yaquina Head Lighthouse in Oregon. The celebration there will culminate on August 20th, which was the day in 1873 when the light began service. Leading up to that date will be a variety of events and ongoing restoration projects.
And speaking of Newfoundland, the Rose Blanche Lighthouse is also celebrating its 150th anniversary this year. Their celebration will be on July 22nd with a live band and a special cake. That sounds good. Rose Blanche is the only granite lighthouse in Atlantic Canada. So, Michelle, before we hear part 2 of the interview with Barry Porter, let's talk a little more about the light stations where he spent his career.
Sure, Jeremy. Barry started his career as a relief keeper at Bacalao Island and then Surgeons Cove Head Light Station. His years as a full-time principal keeper began in 1984 at Long Point Light Station on North Twillingate Island, off the northeast coast of Newfoundland. Long Point, with its distinctive red lighthouse tower, is one of the 23 light stations in Newfoundland that are still staffed by resident keepers. It's also a major tourist attraction.
Barry's next stop in 1988 was Bacalao Island Light Station. Bacalao Island takes its name from the Portuguese word for cod. The cast iron tower with red and white spiral bands is only about 30 feet tall, but the light is 357 feet above sea level. Barry spent 4 years at Bacalao Island and then returned to Surgeons Cove Head on Exploits Island.
Surgeons Cove Head Light Station is also known as Surgeons Cove Point. The Exploits River, the longest river in Newfoundland, empties into the Bay of Exploits, which contains more than 30 islands. A lighthouse was erected on Surgeons Cove Head at the northwest point of the Exploits Island in 1911. The cast iron tower has red and white vertical stripes. Barry ended up staying at Surgeons Cove for 10 years until it was automated in 2002. In 2003, Barry spent a brief period at Puffin Island Lighthouse off Greens Pond on the northwest side of Bonavista Bay.
Then from 2003 to 2006, Barry was back at Long Point Twillingate. He left the Canadian Coast Guard after 23 years of lightkeeping in 2006. There was so much to discuss with Barry, so let's listen to part 2 of my interview with Barry Porter now. Moving ahead here, your next station was Bacalao Island. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes, Bacalao.
More or less, which I think comes from Portuguese for cod,
It's
right?
a Portuguese name, yes.
Yeah, and so what was that like? How was that different from your other stations?
Well, Bacalao, that's a island. It's about 4 miles from Earing Neck and about 11 miles west of Fogle. It's a small island, about 2 miles long, a third to a quarter of a mile wide. It was built the light was built in 1894, I think. That's a much more isolated lighthouse. Very few visitors, just strictly a bit of fishing and shipping going by. So, and the dwelling was, the whole dwelling, the light tower is up on the very highest part of the hill, which is 348 feet above sea level, the light is. But the dwelling was down by the ocean. They built a new dwelling for that as well. The whole one was up by the light tower. But in the early 60s, they built a new dwelling down by the ocean. And that place was considered a bachelor's quarters. So it was a really small house. The 4 lightkeepers that rotated there shared 2 bedrooms. So you never had the room I had on Long Point Twillingate or Surgeons Cove Head. So it was a lot more remote, a lot more isolated, a lot more time with just two people, right? Said no visitors. So that's where I really got into my hobbies down there. And it was the big change from Twillingate because I consider dry land Twillingate. They're on the mainland, right? But Bacalao was a smaller remote station, and it's still beautiful at its own beauty. But the isolation was more remote, was a little trickier that way.
Tell me about the shift changeovers at Bacalao when you had to get on and off the island. I think that was kind of hairy, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had one bad one down there as well. Several bad ones, I guess. You leave from either the community of Herring Neck or Meredith Harbor, and depending on the wind and the sea conditions, sometimes from Pikes Arm, a little bit more shelter. But we done that by speedboat as well. You leave, and two lightkeepers would go out. It was only by boat was probably 5 miles, 4 or 5 miles maximum, but it was open Atlantic, no shelter anywhere. So it gets tricky in the fall of the year, and so usually you could go right into the cove, right under the lighthouse, and throw your supplies aboard, and lightkeeper could do the changeover there. It wasn't quite so rugged as Surgeon's Cove Head. Surgeon's Cove Head, the cliffs were sheer cliffs, basically. And Bacalao, you had the option on the back of the island was what we called Bowel Gulch. And that's where we had another winch and spar and boom where we'd keep our government Coast Guard boat and a boathouse. So if it was real rough, you do your changeover on the back of the island and take your supplies across. But one time we got caught again. This was in December, doing a change, waiting for a helicopter. The chopper was canceled again, right? And we were a couple of days overdue. And same incident. There was a snowstorm coming, and chopper would be hit for more days. So the boys hired the two keepers that was ashore that was wanting to come to work. They hired a local boat operator, and still that was like a 18-foot speedboat. So they hired him. He brought him out. By now it was 2-3 o'clock, really late for a changeover. We always used to do it early in the mornings, but the weather was bad, so we put a push on it. The guys came out and done the changeover, got the supplies on and off. Keepers switched over. It wasn't sea conditions wasn't bad. Storm hadn't hit, but it was brewing. We got off from the cove there. We got out about 500 yards probably, and all of a sudden the storm hit. It was in the forecast. We knew it was coming, and it just boom, zero visibility or 100 feet probably, with snow, blinding snow, strong northerly winds. So it was horizontal in your face. So we had to go this 4 or 5 mile of open water in the boat, and you couldn't see the headlands. You couldn't see where we're going. We just pointing for the best. I was the rookie, so I just put my hood up and let the experienced guys, get me home. And we steamed and steamed. It should have only, within a half an hour, 45 minutes, we should have came to some familiar landmarks. We had to do it slow because it's really, really stormy. We just continued and no land. So I could see the look on Ralph's face. He was getting concerned, the co-worker. They knew they were off course, right? And with the wind and the spray and the snow in your face, you couldn't tell if you're going east or if you're going, you couldn't tell if you're going south or going west. We had no, this was before cell phones or GPSs. Should have had a compass, but the operator forgot his compass, so he never even had a compass. So we stopped dead in the water and just, size up where we're to, right? And, we're all getting sort of anxious. And so we just continued on another slow speed, just take our time. And finally, after about an hour, we came across some rocks. But because the visibility was so poor, we couldn't pick out any landmarks. And the two men were from there. They were quite familiar with every rock, every crack down there. But when your background is void out, you can't tell, where you are really. So we just went around shore, around the rocks, just hoping to find something familiar. And after another bit of time, somebody spotted a rock that we were familiar with. And we had gone to the west a couple miles, totally off course, right? We were way out of where we're supposed to go. But once we seen this familiar rock, we still had fuel in our tanks. So we had to turn around and go back, skirt around the shoreline and find the entrance to the harbor and get home safe. But it was a bit unnerving for a while there, right? And just a typical day as being a lightkeeper in Newfoundland.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one that ever done it, but that was part of the job.
Yeah. Well, you made it. That's the important thing. So speaking of poor visibility, let's talk a little bit about the fog signals. Of course, these days, some fog signals have been deactivated for the most part, like in this country, and it's probably the same there. The ones that are still active are Mariner activated now, so people activate them with their VHF radios. Do you have that system there?
Some places got that, but
yeah.
Back then we had what they call a videograph on all the stations that I worked. Long Point, they all have electronic horns now, but at the time, back in the 80s and 90s, Long Point still had the hair horn, and Surgeon's Cove had Bacalao and Puffin and the electronic horns. I call them Japanese horns, but they were the electronic horns. But they were activated. They could be turned on manually, or they had a system called a videograph, which would shoot a beam of light out 2 miles, and if it didn't bounce back, that means it was clear visibility. But if the light bounced back, that would trigger your horn, and it had a so many minute delay just to make sure it wasn't just a flock of seagulls or something. But that would trigger the foghorn and start it up, right? And that worked pretty good, but conditions in the ideal world works, but out there, salt spray would throw off your readings. If you get freezing ice, freezing glitter on the side of the building, that would disactivate it. So you'd have to go scrape the ice off it or turn it on manually, right? So it wasn't a perfect system, but that's what that I had experience with was one hair horn and the other 3 stations had electronic foghorns.
Yeah. I know that on the Maine coast, the places that had the most fog, the signals were generally operating in the neighborhood of 20% of the time over the course of a year. Do you know approximately how much they were operating there?
No, we never. Years and years ago, there used to be a foghorn logbook, but they discontinued that just when I got into the system in '83. So we never kept a hourly log. It varied. Some stations are worse than others, and snow conditions set it off as well, right? So 20 could be a good average for sure, right? You get in the spring of the year, you could get the northeast wind, rain, and fog for days and days. I think the longest stretch I ever went was 11 days, and I don't mind 2 or 3 days. The horn is blasting all the time, right? But what used to get to me is you're sitting just above the ocean, 200 feet or 300 feet, and you couldn't see the ocean. You might be able to hear a motorboat or a speedboat going by, probably right on the water. It was better visibility, but 11 days is the longest that I went with the horn blowing, and it gets annoying after a few days of that, just looking out into a white cloud, right? Because usually your kitchen window, my office, you had the ocean. You could have icebergs, you could have humpback whales, Mickeys, anything. But when you got zero visibility for days on end, it gets testing.
When the horn was going for that long a stretch, did you kind of stop hearing it after a while because you get so used to it, or were you aware of it the whole time?
Yes, yeah. I didn't have problems, like on your shift off. I had no issues. I could go to sleep, right? Like it didn't affect me, right? It was just autopilot, I guess. Yeah, you get used to it.
Yeah. Bacalao Island Lighthouse is painted with red and white spiral bands. I think maybe you had to paint it at least once while you were there. Is that right?
Yes, the lighthouse with that was a cast iron tower built in 1894, like I said, and it gets rusty. So every couple of years we had the work schedule on the lighthouse that I worked. Everything was painted in 2 years, in a 2-year cycle, inside and outside. The towers, the spar and boom, the little side buildings, the dwelling, and inside as well. Most times in the winter, you was lots of maintenance, lots of upkeep. So the light tower on Bacalao, it was the prettiest one the 4 light stations I worked on. It was the prettiest tower because it had the swirl like a candy cane. But to paint the rascal, it was quite the job because it's up on the very highest part of the hill. So you'd transport all your paints, your brushes, your ladders, your rags, your paint thinners. Oil paint is what we used all the time. So with this tower in particular, 1989, I painted with Ralph. He was the principal keeper. You'd have to chip all the rust blisters off it, let it dry, then apply a primer, a ugly rusty brown primer to it, and then go back and do it with either red or white, depending on the swirl. And you're up on a ladder, you're dangling. I got pictures of me up on a ladder painting the tower, and I got a little piece of rope tied around me, right? But I don't think it was safety approved by no means, but it was all part of the job at the time. But I painted in '89 with dear Ralph, and I guess over the years Ralph must have became color blind, because when we were applying the primer, he thought the primer was the actual glossy red paint. And I had a hard job to convince him. Like, he said, no, it's mislabeled. Like, he really didn't believe me. And it took me a couple of days to convince my coworker that we can't paint this beautiful tower with primer and white. And he took my word for it, but he took a bit of convincing, I tell you. But you get up on the ladder, you chip it, and you prime it, and then you get right up to the top of the tower. That tower was 25 feet high. So you get up 25 feet in a ladder, and you take 2 gallons of paint with you, a glossy red and a glossy white, lid base paint, 2 brushes, and you come down with your white and your red as you go down. And it looked beautiful, but if you get one darn drop of red on the fresh white paint, it was a disaster.
It's
and ruined, so you had to be really, really careful. And you had to wait till a calm day, which is hard to get on these lighthouses. So it was, it would take you a month probably to do a tower and do it properly. But it looked beautiful when it was finished, man. It was, I was proud of it, right? So I done a funny story. I done it with Ralph, who was colorblind in '89. In '91, Ralph was off on holidays, and it was time the 2-year schedule fell to me again. So I had a relief lightkeeper with me, a younger guy, my age. So we got along good. And so we took all the paints, done the same thing, gets up, ready to go painting. And 5 minutes before we start the project, my buddy tells me he's afraid of heights. And I thought he was joking, but he wasn't joking. So I ended up painting the whole darn tower again by myself. And Gord painted the bottom 6 feet probably, right? But
yeah,
it sure looked good when it was finished.
Afraid of heights, it's not even a very tall tower, though, right?
No, but the ladder's what spooked him, I think, right?
Yeah, I can understand dangling. That. Yeah, certainly fear of heights is a very common thing too.
Yes, yeah. It
was
2 interesting paint jobs.
Yeah, that sounds like it. So those of us down south here in the States, kind of when we think of Newfoundland, we think of really, really bad winters. And I don't know if we have the correct idea about that, but how bad were the winters at these light stations where you were? A lot of snow and ice?
The snow, not a real lot of snow, because most of it just blows off. There's so much wind that it just blows off. Like Long Point up 300 feet above sea level on that place where I lived there. No snow hung around. It just blew inland. It was just too much wind. That place was the most vicious place I ever saw wind. And the other light stations, you get a good dump of snow, and some would stay around. You get the Arctic ice around Notre Dame Bay, is where these lighthouses were. It comes down from the north, depending on Mother Nature, but it fills in the bay, and you get rough Arctic ice for miles and miles right to the horizon. And that's when the icebreakers, Canadian Coast Guard icebreakers, got to escort tanker ships or freighters or paper boats back and forth, right? The winters, they were long, but you make the best of it, whatever it was. On Bacalao, when I flew out there in the wintertime, I brought my cross-country skis. So that was, I'm the first lightkeeper ever ski across Bacalao Island, right? I'd go on my day off, I just go. It was only 2 miles long, right? But it was hills and bogs and ponds and trees and valleys and sea caves, and it was a real mixture of landscape, right? But the winters, snow depending. Surgeon's Cove Inn, I know we got dumped there a few times with a bad storm. Myself and my co-worker had two little small motor Elans and motor skis, 12 horsepower Elans snowmobiles there, right? I know one time it was a real bad storm. The schools was closed for 3 days in the bay at home in Louisbourg. And so out there was so much snow in amongst the trees, we couldn't get, when you at Surgeon's Cove, when you leave the station and go into the harbor, you had to go uphill, and it took us days to break the trail and finally get up there because there was so much snow, right? But it depended on the wind direction. But most times, the snow blowed out. You get some snow, but they would be lying, but you wouldn't get a lot of snow. Just the hardy guys would sock us in, right?
Well, speaking of winters, you write in a few places in the book about Christmases at these places over the years. There's a few interesting stories, but maybe we talk about at least one. Can you tell me about the Christmas you spent at Bacalao Island in 1988?
Bacalao, yep. That was my very first Christmas on a isolated lighthouse. I'd done 4 on Long Point, but I was, it wasn't remote, but the Bacalao was really isolated. And so we flew out there a week or two before Christmas, probably a week before. I took a half a turkey, actually. It was only 2 of us, so I took a half a turkey out to have for Christmas Day. A couple Christmas gifts that people gave me, and my wife or girlfriend that gave me. And I had one for my co-worker. Because I like Christmas, always did. I always cut a Christmas tree from day one. Still do to this day. I cut a real tree and put it up. So I ended up out on Bacalao. And the guy working with me was another old timer, but he was only a part time. So I was the senior guy there. But nobody had ever had a Christmas tree on the island, right? It was old school. The old guys didn't believe in celebrating Christmas. And anyhow, as Christmas got closer and closer, I was missing Christmas, and I wanted some little remnants of a Christmas. So I talked to my co-worker. I said I might go back in the valley there and cut a small Christmas tree. And he was flabbergasted. He couldn't believe it. Never been a tree on this island before, right? Like, it was taboo. And so I never done nothing about it. Got closer and closer. Christmas music on the radio and Christmas shows on TV. Mind you, all we had was a black and white TV at that time in '88. And anyhow, I said, no, I'm having a Christmas tree. So I went up in the back, cut this little stumpy 4-foot, 5-foot Charlie Brown tree, came back, put it in a bucket with some rocks. And I did take a bare minimum of decoration, but just something anyhow. So I set up the tree Christmas Eve, set it up, and my old co-worker, he didn't think too highly of it, right? He didn't think a Christmas tree belonged out there. And I vetoed because I was the senior keeper. He was assistant, and I said, I'm putting the tree up for a few days. So put the tree up, and it wouldn't, still not much Christmas spirit. My loved ones and family was back miles and miles away from me. My friends was all celebrating Christmas. I get a couple phone calls on the mobile radio or on the phone, but my communication was the darn CB radio back then, which wasn't very good. And I put the tree up, and I was lonely. I had Christmas blues. I guess Christmas Eve, I remember, you're missing being with family and friends, right? And I went down in the basement. There was a dartboard there, so I played a game of darts by myself. I think I won, but anyhow, I had the Christmas blues, was Christmas music on the radio, and I was off shift, so I went upstairs and just jumped into bed, just wishing for it to be over. Next day, it was northeast wind and rain and snow, a messy day. I hardly got out of bed, and tried to make the best of Christmas. We had a meal, we exchanged gifts, but in the meantime, the old guy was still grumbling about a Christmas tree in the living room. So after about 3 days, I said, enough is enough, and I took the darn tree, never even took the decorations off it and just chucked it out over the cliff into the wild Atlantic Ocean. And that was my experience with a Christmas tree on Bacalao.
Yeah, I know. Again, there's other Christmas stories you tell in the book, but we'll can save those for when people read the book for themselves. You talked about storms a couple of minutes ago, but any storms we haven't touched on that really stand out in your memory from these places?
I had a couple of bad ones on Surgeons Cove. One was the storm that I told you about that had all that wind and the schools were closed for 3 days. We had that much wind that night. It was blowing over the house. It was from the northeast. And it was probably 70, 80 mile an hour wind. And it sucked one of the windows out of our the dwelling. Mm-hmm. There was so much wind going over the house, the window cracked. The glass, now one shard came in the house and just sucked out, like you see in the movies when a airplane gets punctured or something, right? It was a scary night, but it was a bad storm. I got caught in another one in a freak snowstorm in June. If you want to hear about that one, I can tell you. I was working at the lighthouse, but at the time, 92 or 93, and I came in the bay. Usually when you go out on the lighthouse, you're there for 32 days, and that's it. On Surgeons Cove, it was 20 miles out the bay, but the hard time, if conditions were good, a lightkeeper might run home for a couple hours to get a few supplies or whatever and return again, right? If on your day off, if conditions were good and all this. So this was in June the 4th. I had made plans to come in, visit home in my speedboat. I had my own boat anchored in the harbor. So you get up like 6 o'clock in the morning, you had a hour hike across the Highland, jump aboard your speedboat and cruise in the bay. At the time, I was doing a big renovations at my house here. I had a contractor here doing some work. So I sort of had to come in and he had some questions for me on the renovations that he was doing. So I came in, picked up a couple supplies, had a quick lunch with my wife, and turned to leave, return to the lighthouse. It normally takes 1 hour by speedboat when conditions were good. But just when I was leaving the lighthouse, leaving home, my home at Porterville, I noticed the wind had changed. It was cutting in from the north, and forecast didn't call for any of this. I cruised for about a half an hour, and then I hit snow. It was actually snowing June the 4th or 3rd, one of it. It was snowing as it went out the bay further. It got cooler, and the seas built up, and it just got terrible. It got a couple 100 feet visibility again, and I had to get back to work or I'd be in trouble. So I cruised and cruised. I had to trim the western shoreline, keep a eye on the compass, and just cruise line shore like quarter throttle, and get out close to the lighthouse, close to Exploits Island. But there was a body of water I had to cross, what he calls the ship's run. I had to leave Muddy Old Point and cut across to Exploits Island. And that little short section is a couple kilometers long, but you're totally exposed to the northerly winds and the snow. I got there and I knew it was going to be pretty risky going across there because the wind was increasing and the snow, the visibility was just terrible. And the sea was rolling in like you wouldn't believe. So I just stopped at Muddy Old Point for a few minutes, got a breather. I had VHF radio contact with my co-worker. So I told him where I was to, and I told him what I was going to attempt to do across this ship's run. I just made sure, checked my fuel supply, my fuel lines, make sure there was nothing to move around, any paddles or ropes to get bounced around. And I left the shelter off that little point and started my trip across the ship's run. And it was just terrible. I was only in a 17-foot boat. My boat was a small one. And I used to have to cut my boat into every minute or two. I used to have to cut my boat into the big swell, ride that out, straighten it up again, and try to keep a bearing on my compass. And all the time, the snow was beating in my face. It was like bullets into my face. And I cruised and cut into the swells again. And next thing I seen land. And when I, got a little closer, it was the same point of land that I left from. And I mysteriously made a full circle in zero visibility and didn't know it. And I was just, I couldn't believe it. First time I've ever done it. I've heard stories about it, people walking or skiing in zero visibility. So I regrouped and tried it again, and swells were coming in. I used to have to cut into the swells, and I done the same darn thing again. I done it twice.
Wow.
Couldn't believe it. I done 2 circles, and I went back, called my my Arch, my co-worker on the lighthouse, and said, Arch, I said, I'm going to try it one more time. If I don't make it across this time, I'm going to go back in the bay and break into a couple small fishing cabins that I saw and ride out the storm there. So I had contact with him, and I, checked his weather conditions, and he, it was terrible there, just a few miles north of there. So I attempted it one more time and paying extra attention to my compass, and slowly, I timed it. I checked my watch before I left that point of the land and to see how long, right? And 30 minutes later, I arrived on the exploit side of this ship's run. So I'd made it, but it was a scary, the most scariest time I've ever been in a boat by myself. And I cruised down into the harbor. The harbor was in the middle of the Highland of Exploits. Exploits is 2 islands in one, really, with a harbor in the middle. It used to be a big fishing community, but it's resettled. And I stopped in there and tied up my boat. And when I took my cap off my head, my baseball cap, there was about 4 inches of snow just packed onto my cap just from the slop snow. But it was a scary, and this was June the 4th. It was a scary boat ride for June month. And I don't think I ever went ashore anymore after that.
Wow. That sounds like a real nightmare. I've seen hailstorms that left, white stuff on the ground in summer, but not actual snow in June down here. It's up even where you are. I'm sure that's pretty unusual.
Yes, it was. Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about wildlife. We talked about seals earlier, but whales are another common thing you would see at those around there. Was there a variety of kinds of whales? And part 2 of that question is, did you ever have any kind of close encounters with any?
Yes. Actually, part of our job was giving whale reports to Memorial University, their whale research department. We were given forms by the university, and any sightings, you'd have to write down the type of whale if you knew it, because you can tell, we'd have hookback whales, minke whales, and they were the most common ones, some dolphins, but you could distinguish the different whales by their tail or their spout when they blow, right?
Yeah.
So you keep a tally of whatever whales you see, right? So that I used to enjoy that, recording the whales and sending them to the university. My only one real close encounter was that time I was out seal hunting on Bacalao. I was hunting for a seal, but I never did get it. So I just out. I give up on the hunt. I just out admiring the beauty between the ice pans and the flat calm Atlantic, right? And I seen a humpback breach. He came up there and he was feeding, I guess, because he was some activity there. So he dove, and I had my camera with me again. So I scooted over in my speedboat to where the whale had just dove, and he leaves a footprint, is what they call when the humpback goes down. And I parked right in the middle of this footprint, and it just the waves just rippled out on both sides of my little 18-foot fiberglass boat. It was a Coast Guard boat, and I said, "Man, this guy he's big," and so I sort of got spooked out there by myself. I'm out 3, 4, 5 miles all by my lonesome in amongst the ice band, not a soul around. And I got a little spooked, so I said I better head back to the lighthouse. And so I put the motor in gear, and I just looked over the side, just curiosity. And when I did, the humpback was only 4 or 5 feet under me. I could see the white sides of his fin. He was swimming just below me, just sizing up, wondering what this lonely lightkeeper was doing, I guess. But anyhow, it was quite the encounter with Mother Nature.
I guess so.
Yeah.
It brings back many years ago, I did a whale watch out of Gloucester, Mass. And right near the whale watching boat, there were a couple of guys in a really small boat small motorboat, and a humpback went right underneath them just like that. It was really close to the surface, and all of us are kind of gasping on the whale watch boat, and they're on one side of their little boat looking at it, then they run to the other side, they're looking at it, but nothing happened. I think the whales are pretty smart, and they try to avoid any collisions like that. Wow. Yes. So what other kinds of wildlife did you typically see at these places?
There was orca whales as well. I forgot to mention them.
Yeah.
Birds, lots of birds, and Bacalhau especially. You get eagles, gannets, puffins, or saltwater pigeons, we call them actually. The hod puffin, not many. And snowy owls. You just get snowy owls in there. They're beautiful. It's the only time I ever seen them. I guess they fly on the outside hedges of the northeast coast of Newfoundland. But in the wintertime, when I ski down over the Highland, quite often I'd see these two big, beautiful owls just pitched there, right? And they were a treat to see. Like they were just huge. When they take off, you could almost feel the wind from their wings, right? Their wings. Ptarmigans was out there when I go down, also on Bacalhau. You go down across the Highland and berry picking, or just out for a hike to clear your mind. These darn birds would be right under your feet. They just take off out of the bushes a few feet from you and just scare the living daylights out of you. Because I'm out there on the Highlands, only me and the other keeper, and he's back a mile and a half from me. There's not a soul around, right? But these birds used to give me quite the rush.
Yeah. We
had the treat on Bacalhau. One of these times I was down across the island berry picking with my Beagle Gypsy. She flushed out a fox this one time, and we've never seen a fox on the island. It was a dirty old gray fox, and I was just curious where it came from. I figured it must have came out on the ice from the mainland, and I seen it that one day. Then it disappeared, and later in the fall, I looked out this day. We'd be cooking dinner again at Bacalhau, and I looked out the window, and there's Mr. Fox sat down about 200 feet up from the dwelling. I guess with the windows open, we were cooking, good grub. It smelled the food, and by now its food source had been getting really low, and it started hanging around the lighthouse. So I'm a dog lover, so I started throwing food out to the fox, and I throw it, 50 feet first, and next day 49 feet, and over weeks and weeks I dragged them in closer and closer and closer, and over a couple months period, I got it on videotape of them taking it 10 feet away from me, 5 feet away from me, and the very closest I ever got is holding out a fork and it taking a piece of meat from my fork and scampering back and eating it. But it took months and months for him to trust me. And if I blinked when he'd come in, the fox would flatten down to the ground as flat as it could with this wild look on his face and accept my food and then scamper off. And that went on for a few days. And then one day, suddenly, it showed up with a pup. It was a female fox and it had a pup, and it was a hardy fox. By now, they turned pure white, which was really amazing. I've never seen a hardy fox before. But it was there with his pup. And so then, I got thinking it had to come down in the spring on the Hardy ice floe, right? Because we do get the hod polar bear have been seen spotted in the northeast coast, right? So I guess the fox came down on the Hardy that spring, stayed on the Highland all summer, and in the fall of the year started getting hungry, and she started coming to the lighthouse for food, and I fed it for a few months, and I think then finally when the ice packed in again, it probably hit it off to greener pastures, right? But it was pretty neat.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
You just mentioned polar bears. Did you ever see any polar bears around your stations?
No, I never ever saw a polar bear around the station. I used to have dreams or nightmares about it when I was on Bacalhau. Yeah. I'd ski down over the Highland, right? And, there'd be radio reports of polar bears on Fogle Island, which was just east of me, and sightings in Twillingate or sightings up in St. Anthony, right? Even this past spring, there was a dozen or more polar bears sighted in in Newfoundland, right, that came down from on the ice, right. When I was back in Twillingate, my last gig there in the 2000s, there was a polar bear sighted in Crowhead and Wild Cove. Crowhead and Wild Cove, or Back Harbour, one of them. A couple of the communities not that far from the lighthouse. They broken into the sheds and stolen meat and whatever out of deep freezes, and there was a polar bear on the loose. And I'm working at the lighthouse by myself. That was on a Wednesday. Thursday, the wildlife department was out in their helicopter flying, trying to find this polar bear, because they usually tranquilize them and take them, transport them further out on the ice floe. And they were flying all around the lighthouse that day, and they found tracks like only a couple thousand feet from the lighthouse, and they never did find the bear. So I was commuting back and forth again during this stage of my career at Long Point, because you wouldn't let to live there. And I remember, because the polar bear sightings around, when I went to work that day, I was staying down and doing a night shift, a Friday night shift, midnight to 8 o'clock. I borrowed my father's 30-30 Winchester. I took the gun with me and went to work with it, first time and only time. So I'm down there in uniform with my my trusty rifle by my side. And midnight, I go on shift. I had a nap earlier in the day, and then I went on shift midnight. Part of our duties was to record the weather conditions and visibility and wind direction and all that, right? And I always, from day one, like to go out and just stand in the wind, feel it, and be a human weather guide, sort of. By now, it was light snow and a little bit of fog. Everything was white. And I remember walking out of the office with my gun and just standing in the wind, right, trying to get a feel for the wind and the direction. And the whole time I'm thinking, that darn polar bear, he could be, 200 feet away. A white bear in fog and snow, you'd never see him, right? But that was my closest encounter. I never did see him, but he was in the neighborhood, and it was a bit nerving, that's for sure.
Yeah, I guess it would be. Maybe he was out there in the snow and fog, but at least I didn't get too close. So let's shift gears a little bit here. Tell me about your marriage proposal at Bacalao Island.
My marriage
It's a great
proposal.
story.
Yeah, that's people like that part of my book. I got to say, there's different. I've had some great feedback on my book, and everybody picks at a certain different piece of it, right? But the proposal is a popular one. I met my wife when I was at Long Point Lighthouse originally, back in '84. That's when where the magic happened, where we fell in love. And in 1989, I'm working on Bacalao Island again, this remote station. And the hard time, if we're lucky, if the weather conditions were good, she worked shift work. She was a pharmacist, so she might only get out once a year, twice a year, to visit for a weekend. So I went in Herring Neck and speedboat, picked her up, brought her right to the lighthouse for the weekend, and we've been in love, and I wanted to propose to her, and I was thinking Bacalao is as good a place as any. So I schemed up the plan. When I was at the lighthouse, I went down to, there's one little tiny harbor on the back of the island. It's only about 10 feet wide, and it's a little hind draft about 150 feet of rock. And then it opens up to a very, very small cove, but it's called Bacalao Harbor. Not much of a harbor, but you can manage to get in there. But anyhow, I walked down there earlier that day, and I planted a message in a bottle. Messages in the bottles. I've thrown a couple overboard in my life, but anyhow, I was going to try this for my proposal, and I knew the tide was up, a little bit of sea on, and with any luck, it might land in the right place. So I ran down 20 minutes down across the island, planted this bottle with a note in it. I wrote a really nice note. I wrote it in the shape of a heart, and on the end of it, basically was "I love you and will you marry?" And I put it on the side of the cliff. Went back to the lighthouse where my Alice was, and my co-worker, and had a cup of tea probably, and then we I said, let's go for a walk, go for a little picnic down across the island. So we packs a small lunch, walks down to Bacalao Harbor, right? Nice, little, beautiful sunny day. And by now the tide is after rising slowly, and I'm watching the corner of my eye. And after about 20 minutes, finally I see some movement, and the tide and the wash of the sea pushed this little bottle in like 50 feet. You couldn't have done no better with a remote control. And it came in close to the cove. And by now Hal spotted it, and she's getting all excited. So we had to throw a few rocks outside. She nabbed it and opened it up, read the message, and by now she had it figured out. And that was my proposal. So thank God she said yes. And thank God the tides didn't take the bottle over to Change Islands or Fogle somewhere.
Yeah. That is possibly the best marriage proposal I've ever heard. I love it. It's great. Yeah, I guess so. I know she's there with you now. So you've mentioned hockey earlier, but we didn't get too much into it. But pond hockey was a pretty big deal at Bacalao Island, right?
Well, it was a thrill. I played hockey for about 50 years. And when I went to Bacalao, it had 2 or 3 small little ponds on this island. So I took my skate set. I used to, I had several different skates. If you get the conditions, you only get a few days in the winter where there's snow had melted and it was good ice. So I'd skate and get a great bit of fun out of it. Take the stick and puck with me, but it's not much fun by yourself. But this one time I was there with Gord Jones from Tunnegate. He was a relief keeper again. So he was filling in for a shift with me. And he was, young blood, young spirit like me. The whole guys would never do it. But anyhow, Gord volunteered to get in it. He played goalie, and so we set up. I went up, got a scraper, scraped off the little pond there, and had a good game of hockey for an hour or two, right? But just good exercise, good fresh air, bit of recreation when you're out stuck on an isolated island in January month, right? It's good for the body and good for the soul. So it worked out good. Me and Gord was able to have a few laughs and do it, right? But it was no good for me to suggest that to some of the old guys I worked with. But it was entertaining. It was good.
Yeah, I played one-on-one basketball, but one-on-one hockey is an interesting concept. But it sounds like you had fun. So let's just touch on medical emergencies. Obviously, being in these really isolated places, it was pretty tough dealing with any kind of medical emergency that came up because you were far from any kind of professional medical assistance. But you wrote about something really scary that happened to another keeper at Bacalao.
It was back January the 15th, 1992. My coworker injured himself. I had to call up on the service of the Search and Rescue, Canadian Armed Forces Search and Rescue helicopter. We had just finished a meal on Bacalao again. Actually, the night before, we had a really, really bad storm of freezing rain. Everything was covered in glitter, ice. The rocks, the helicopter pad had a half-inch of ice on it. It was so bad that my radio antenna had broken off, snapped in the ice. So it was a icy condition, really bad. But we'd just finished our big cooked dinner, and my buddy was taking the garbage out. I was just finishing up doing the dishes, and when he went to go down the basement steps, he slipped. He missed the first step and just tumbled the whole way to the bottom of the steps, and really injured his back. And he was a big, heavy set man, and I was afraid to move him in case back injuries or whatever. So I heard the thump and the squeal and I ran down to see what was happening. And he was in the bottom of the steps, just crumbled up in big time pain. Like he was urging, almost throwing up from pain. And I just, made sure he was okay. He was breathing. And I had to run back upstairs and called the Canadian Coast Guard radio station through VHF first and just told them I had an emergency. And could you call for a search and rescue helicopter? And I ran back down just to comfort Gord again, put a blanket over him. And a few minutes later, the search and rescue team from Gander the airport in Gander called me and wanted to know his condition and what happened, and just that they were en route, just about to leave the airport. And I also told him at the time it was really, really icy out there, so be careful of the ice conditions here. So I went back down and comforted Gord as best I could. He wasn't bleeding. He was breathing fine. He was just in a lot of pain. And I just kept him company, assured him that everything was going to be good. I took down my cassette radio and played him some John Prine to him. Just was the only thing I could do. And I don't know how long it took. It seemed like it took forever, but they weren't. They were probably on site in about 45 minutes. I got here. It's the big Labrador. This chopper is now replaced, but back in when Gord fell down, it was the old Labrador helicopter they used to use. Really big double prop. And I heard it coming, and I went to the radio, talked to him on the radio, and they hovered above the helicopter pad there for a few minutes and determined that it was too dangerous to land there because it was a strong crosswind. Everything was covered in ice. Plus, that helicopter pad wasn't designed for this big chopper. There was a sheer cliff just to the east of it, and really not enough room for this chopper to safely land there. So they had to go to Plan B, which involved winching down 2 paramedics. They hover overhead, and the noise from this chopper in the downwash is amazing. She's a big chopper, and they lowered down 2 paramedics and a stretcher, and the boys came in, carefully walked over the ice, came into the basement where Gord was, and started doing their first aid on him. They checked him over, put a neck brace on him, and then put him in a back brace and onto a stretcher. And while they were doing this, I was talking to my superior, my boss in St. John's, and my supervisor told me that I wasn't allowed to stay at the lighthouse by myself. Because Gord was going to have to be flown to the hospital, so I would have to leave as well. It was a safety issue. You weren't allowed to be there by yourself, especially in the winter. So I packed the bag real quick, and I went out. We carried Gord out to the helicopter pad, and the big Labrador came back around again and lowered down their winch, the stretcher, and we hooked Gord on, and they winched him up into the side door of the big Labrador, and then the second paramedic winched up, just zipped up like Spider-Man you see in the movies. I couldn't believe it. It was about 100 feet above, and this massive school bus just hovering above me. Like she's big. She's 25,000 pounds, a beast of a machine. And so it's just me and the last paramedic standing on the pad there, and I'm just looking at him, wondering what's the next move.
Yeah.
And before I knew it, he put a hook around me, wrapped his 2 legs around and arms around me, and I just spiraled up to the helicopter. Right, I'm looking down at the time and just seeing the size of the helicopter pad just shrink as I'm being lifted up into this chopper. Right, and by now it was getting dark. And it was just amazing. It was almost like something out of a movie. And he just gently tipped and flew over to Twillingate Hospital, which was approximately 12 miles away, and landed at the helicopter pad at the hospital site. And Gord was admitted for a couple of days. He had some muscles torn in his back, and he was off for a few months. And I made arrangements for my wife to pick me up, and I went back home for a couple of days until the Coast Guard arranged for another relief lightkeeper and for the weather conditions to improve for me to go back out. Right, but it was a scary event, and to see the paramedics and these professionals in action was amazing, because I'd had dealings with them over the years. A few search and rescue missions, reporting flares or some boat in trouble. So I've had dealings with them, but I never dreamt I'd ever have to call for their services to be to come to my lighthouse, but it worked out good.
Yeah. You left one important part out of that story. Just before you were lifted up to the helicopter in the book, you said the paramedic said something to you, And this is a G-rated podcast, so I won't say the whole thing. Hold on to your something.
Yeah.
I will leave it to people's imaginations so they can read the book. But when I read that, I laughed really, really loudly. And I told it to my wife, and she laughed too.
Well, he shouted it to me, and I said, I was about to say what, because it was so noisy, and I never had a chance to get an answer. He just wrapped his arms around me, and I did hold on. Yes, but it was funny.
Well, good thing they did it quickly. If you had too much time to think about it, it would have been harder. Yeah, definitely.
Again, you can order Barry Porter's book, Adventures of a Lightkeeper, from online booksellers. You can get a signed copy directly from Barry by messaging him through Facebook. Just get on Facebook and do a search for Barry Porter, author.
Part 3 of the interview next week will include Barry's thoughts about automation and destaffing, and also a couple of spooky stories Barry experienced during his career. For now, a reminder to our listeners to check out uslhs.org for more information on everything the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers, including tours and preservation grants.
If you listen through Apple Podcasts, be sure to rate and review us. If you work to preserve lighthouses, keep up the good work. We're all on the same team.
As always, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thank you so much for listening, and
keep a good light.